Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and I trust the weekend was fun. Dad was over, we certainly had a good time. My home thoughts turned to this photograph of the winter sunrise over West Dorset by Stephen Banks, which I thought was quite beautiful. Political reflections: Russia will not risk the new Ukrainian government, which it regards as illegitimate, controlling so much of Crimea that it could render Sevastopol naval base inoperable, says David Owen, and I have to agree with him. Spheres of influence exist in the minds of many nations, not just Russia, even if not formally acknowledged in law. There are other lessons from history too, which I researched for my latest book, says David Owen. One of them is to be careful about the military encirclement of a potential enemy, and that's why I keep using that installation of the snake by A. Weiwei. When Britain built the Triple Entente with France and Russia, Germany in its Triple Alliance with Austria, Hungary and Italy felt surrounded. Russia feels this today as NATO's boundaries come ever closer. US Air Force General Philip Breedlove said the build-up of Russian troops on the country's border with Ukraine means NATO forces need to reposition themselves and increase their readiness. Russian troops massing at the border are very, very sizable and very, very credible, Breedlove, the top NATO commander, said today at the German Marshall Fund conference in Brussels. We need to think about our allies, the positioning of our forces in the alliance, and our readiness of our forces in the alliance, such that we can be there to defend against them if required, especially in the Baltics and other places. The focus on the crisis in Ukraine is shifting to whether Russia will seek to claim other parts of the country now its annexation of Crimea is complete. US and European leaders are warning that Russia faces further punishment if it doesn't defuse the crisis. US intelligence and military officials say there are now Russian troops along virtually all of the country's border with Ukraine. Some units have moved within 35 miles of the border, said the officials who requested anonymity. With thousands of Russian troops still massed on Ukraine's borders, there's a grave risk of the Ukraine crisis deepening. This is William Hague in the Sunday Telegraph. This is the most serious risk to European security we have seen so far in the 21st century. And I think I go back to David Owen's comment in that, in matters geopolitical, he could not afford to lose Sevastopol, the naval port. It would have completely emasculated Putin and Russia as a projector of power in the 21st century. And I think that was the bottom line. It's NATO that's right up against his border, not him against NATO, in point of fact. The Bloomberg is saying Putin has exposed NATO's weakness, even as Russia's annexation of Crimea is answered with an economic rather than a military response from the West. The crisis is provoking some uncomfortable reckoning on the part of NATO. Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen has called it a wake-up call that should prompt both the US and Europe to ratchet up their commitment to the transatlantic alliance. And my other point was really, I thought that it was all about the pivot. You can't pivot two ways simultaneously. So, on balance, I think Putin is probably someone with whom you can reset relations as long as his core national interests aren't being jeopardized, which I think he clearly felt it was. Interesting piece by Lawrence Wilkerson, who was the advisor to Colin Powell, called The Elephant versus the Shark. So where is US Pacific policy headed if we are not careful? The trajectory heads straight back to 1935. It won't be isolationism, a nebulous term in any event that is often used to cover lazy analyses, but a setup for catastrophic events to come. A short exercise illustrates the point. At the top of a letter-sized piece of paper write China and United States, And beneath those words, the allies of each country next put down all the other countries of the region, using India as the pivot point, and including all countries to its east. Most countries will fall into this non-aligned group. Even several countries bound by security treaty to the United States, such as the Philippines, will want to be there. Also list Russia, Turkey, Iran, because they too are in Asia and are important to Asia's future and are discounted only by fools. If we are schooled in the military arts, we immediately see from this exercise the prospect of conflict on a massive scale. Countries will side with the great power most able to compel them to do so, or risk being swallowed up. At the climax of this awesome conflict, the massive land power will confront the formidable sea power. It will be an epic contest between the elephant and the shark. The shark cannot come ashore, and the elephant cannot go to sea. Their attempt to grapple with one another will create a sheer hell for everyone within proximity. Ultimately, as in every war game in which I have participated that played this scenario, each side will turn to nuclear weapons as the only potentially decisive device left in its arsenal. This resort to the nuclear option will occur after all the economic and cyber warfare, satellite killer missions, area denial, air-sea battle, and other tools of power have been utterly exhausted. Is there an alternative future? You'll have to read the article, which was in Asia Times. It's on the front. It's on Rich Wrap-Ups as well. Prime Minister Erdogan said, "If you violate my airspace, our slap after this will be hard," he said. A Syrian airplane was shot down on Sunday by the Turkish military, which claimed the jet had violated the country's airspace. Our F-16s took off and hit this plane. Why? Because if you violate my airspace, our slap after this will be hard. Turkey's Twitter ban, however, has backfired. Tweets are up 138% apparently, and VPN usage is up. And then jumping from there to Assad, apparently I found this interesting in an article written by Robert Fisk. When he visited the wreckage of Baba Amma in Homs, soldiers surrounded the president with the usual cries of self-sacrifice in the cause of Assad. Assad himself immediately walked over to the state television crew and ordered them to cut the sequence from the evening news. This was the army's victory, not his. And in that same article, Fisk quotes President Obama regarding Ukraine. What we're going to do is mobilize all our diplomatic resources to make sure that we've got a strong international correlation that sends a clear message. Currency markets, the euro is around the 138 level, the dollar index 80.13. You'll note we haven't managed to get ahead of this price congestion area. So on balance, I think the dollar index is going to come back. Japanese yen 102.48, the Swiss franc 0.8833, the pound 164.88, the Aussie 0.9080, and the Aussie strength in the teeth of some very weak Chinese data is noteworthy. India rupee 60.715, South Korean won 1079.85, the Rial 232.62, the Egyptian pound 695.72, and the Rand 1089.83, holding above the 11 level. The yen and euro dropped 0.9% last week against the dollar. Dollar strengthened against all the major developed nation currencies except the Aussie. The Purchasing Managers Index for China's manufacturing dropped to 48.1 in March. This is HSBC and Market Economics. Preliminary reading compares with the 48.7 median estimate of analysts. So you can see the Chinese economy coming below expectations. It was a pretty awful number. And typically you would expect the Aussie to get a bit more of a slap than it did. Good point. The Australian economic story is decoupling a little bit from China, and our economic success is less in their hands, and that's probably why we've seen a more muted reaction to that number. That's an interesting point. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, and you can see we've come right up to this resistance level around 80.10 to 80.30, about which I've previously spoken, but we're failing to push through it. Of course, the Fed Chair Janet Yellen said at a press conference that she saw a considerable time between the end of bond purchase stimulus and the first rate boost, meaning around 6 months or that type of thing. I think a lot of people did not expect that such a short timeline. Euro dollar 138.01. I'll put up a 3-month chart. Obviously, we got as high as 139 and change. We've come back down, but we seem to be in the middle of that retracement. Dollar yen 102.48. Bear in mind the Bank of Japan Deputy Governor Kikuo Iwata speaks today amid bets the BOJ will boost stimulus to ease the impact of a planned tax increase due to take effect next week. Gold, coming to the commodity markets, gold fell 3.1% last week to $1,336 an ounce. MSI All Country World Index of Equities rose 0.7%, the dollar index rose 0.6%, Treasury Bond Index fell 0.5%. I'll put up a 3-month chart of gold, now trading 1327.54, touched a 6-month high of 1392.60 on March 17. I think it's a false rally, and we're headed back down to 1,000. Of course, gold jumped more than 500% in 12 straight years of gains through 2012, reaching a record of $1923.70 in September 2011. Crude oil, $99.20. I think it's a sell above 100. Copper, I'll put up a 1-year chart. Copper fell 0.9% on that Chinese news, and it's not too far off the lowest level since July 2010, which was reached on March 19. That was $6,321 a ton. Moving to emerging markets, the Dubai index has more than doubled in the past 12 months. It has had 3 winning streaks of 7 days or more this year, as it's gained a total now of 30.54% and is the top performer among more than 90 indices tracked by Bloomberg. I'll put up a link to the index, which is, as I said, up 30.54% this year, and a photograph I took of Dubai from the sky. Coming to sub-Saharan Africa, interesting story in BD Live, which is via the FT, saying reality check for investors in African growth story. South of the Sahara economies have flourished over the past decade, earning the continent the name Africa Rising, but growing pains are clouding the short-term outlook for a region that has become a magnet for foreign investors. On the surface, all looks well. Regional growth is expected to rise to 6% this year, from 5% in 2013. The IMF estimates making it second only to developing Asia in the pace of its expansion. Inflation remains under control, having stabilized last year at 5.5%. Hitherto rising African stars Ghana, Nigeria, Uganda, and Zambia are experiencing economic, social, or political problems, or a combination of all three. Add to this the turbulence in emerging markets as the US Federal Reserve tapers its monetary stimulus. Global monetary conditions set to tighten over the coming years. Investors are now paying closer attention to the region's vulnerabilities. Some countries may be required to tighten policy in line with global interest rates, leading to a period of softer growth. Sub-Saharan Africa is one of the big beneficiaries of the search for yield. This enabled the continent as a whole to issue a record $10 billion in US dollar-denominated sovereign bonds in 2013, up from $1 billion a year earlier. Then talking about commodities being a big revenue source, but the price of copper has fallen to less than $6,500 a ton, down more than a third from its 2011 peak. And where copper goes, so does Zambia. Nigeria economic growth remains robust. IMF has forecast it will accelerate to 7.3% this year, up from 6.4% in 2013. But essentially that argument between the president and the central banker, which the president has won, I think has created a repricing of Nigerian risk, and the stock market will remain soft, I think, until we get something more positive. And then concluding in this article, saying there is no single speed rapid growth trajectory for Africa rising. From time to time we're going to have a bump in the road. And when I was presenting in London, I said, Africa's not linear. And now I think that's clearly the case. The US is sending Osprey aircraft, more special operations forces, to hunt Joseph Kony. Obama has ordered a sharp increase in US special operations forces deployed to Uganda, sent US military aircraft there for the first time in the ongoing effort to hunt down Joseph Kony. CV-22 Osprey aircraft will arrive in Uganda by midweek, along with refueling aircraft and about 150 Air Force Special Operations Forces and other airmen to fly and maintain the planes. So they're clearly putting their shoulder against the wheel. I'll put up a photograph of a CV-22 Osprey. The South African all-share retreated Fridays. However, it remains up 1.52% in 2014. Dollar versus rand was still below that important 11 level, but we're in this wide range of 1060 to 1150. But it's a little bit firmer. If the dollar sells off, I think we should see this go back to the 1062, 1065 level. Egyptian pound, we've been around this level for eternity. Egyptian stock market up 25.46% this year. Africa's best performing stock market, not far off Dubai. Nigerian all shares down 7.83%. The Ghana Stock Exchange is up 11.4% in 2014, but bear in mind a great deal of that return has been eroded by a weak cedi. Zambia announced on Friday that it's scrapping 2 laws which restrict foreign exchange trade, triggering the kwacha's biggest gain against the dollar in 15 months. Legislation introduced in 2012 that bans the use of dollars and other currencies within Zambia is revoked with immediate effect, Finance Minister Chikwanda told reporters today in the capital. The government also abandoned a law that requires companies to notify the Bank of Zambia of foreign transactions, Chikwanda said at the briefing, while flanked by officials from the central bank. Before Friday's announcement, the kwacha had weakened by more than 13% against the dollar in 2014. And of course, it's taken a hit from the price of copper, which is down in lockstep about the same amount. Let's see if this is a dead cat bounce or whether gains any traction. The African Export-Import Bank Afrexim yesterday gave Zimbabwe a $100 million loan to allow its central bank to set up an interbank market for the first time in 5 years. Local banks would be able to borrow from others with surpluses and set an overnight accommodation interest rate, which would act as a benchmark for market rates. The continent's population is estimated to double by 2050. Analysts expect that electricity demand will treble in southern Africa and quadruple in East Africa in the next 25 years. Zimbabwe has appointed a banker, Manguti, as the new central bank governor, but bear in mind, since Zimbabwe ditched its local currency in 2009 in favor of the US dollar, it has left the RBZ unable to set interest rates or bail out troubled banks. Coming to Kenya, Africa Confidential has written an interesting piece called Kenya, a Year of Living Precariously. The ICC's case against President Kenyatta is in disarray, but so are his own political forces and the managers of his grandiose public spending plans. At the presidential inauguration of Uhuru Kenyatta last April, few would have predicted the chaotic current state of the Jubilee Alliance government. Then almost his sole preoccupation was to avoid trial at the International Criminal Court. The government has since expended so much energy on the ICC case that the business of running the country has suffered. 1 year on, the ICC case, which Kenyatta once described as a personal challenge, is all but over. Indeed it is. It's a stale biscuit. It's just waiting to crumble. According to this article, there have been indications that the office of the prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, has been looking for the right moment to announce that the trial cannot go forward. Yet, Kenyatta's government is now deep in a war with an unexpected foe itself. The president and his allies are fighting battles against the bureaucracy inherited from the previous government, but are not prevailing. The conflicts are whittling away at the president's authority and preventing his government from carrying out even some of its basic functions. Crime, inflation, grand corruption have risen sharply in the last year. Expectations of an economic takeoff have dimmed since the cheers that greeted Kenyatta's disputed election victory. The government has incurred new debt, inflated the public wage bill against a background of falling tourism revenue, the result of the Westgate terrorist attack, and Islamist activity on the coast. Again, we saw problems there this weekend. Beside concern about loans from China and elsewhere, mostly for infrastructure expansion, there are worries about the growing cost of the new devolved counties. Public sector pay crisis has most starkly revealed the tensions within the government. On leaving a cabinet retreat a fortnight ago, Kenyatta announced that he and his deputy, William Ruto, would take a 20% pay cut, along with their cabinet. The reason, the public wage bill was fast becoming unsustainable. And then somebody cracked a joke saying, they had a retreat for 4 days, and they spent more money on that retreat than the pay cut he had just taken. They didn't appreciate the joke, saying that the State House is flexing authoritarian muscle, a habit that Kenyatta displays with increasing frequency. Jubilee government's first has been characterized by an impatience with the new constitution, saying the president's troops in parliament began an assault on devolutionists almost as soon as they'd been sworn in, saying that there is a degree of sycophancy now that we haven't seen since the era of President Daniel Arap Moi. Talking about the challenge with Parliament, saying Kenyatta has admitted that corruption cartels have touched his own office, but he blames the deep state. And this is my point, which I've made severally, that not a single individual has lost their position. And until that happens, the president looks very beholden to other interests. If the attack on the constitution is a slide back to authoritarian rule, the contest between divergent factions of the executive appears connected to controlling resources. Most recent scandal concerns procurement for school computers, a $300 million pledge high on Jubilee's manifesto, which is now stuck in the mud of corruption claims at the Education Ministry. That was my point. That was your overarching campaign promise. And to allow it to sort of go down in a hail of gunfire, as it has, is quite worrying. Both Securocrats and the judiciary angrily denied claims that senior civil servants leaned on the Supreme Court last March to reject ex-Prime Minister Raila Odinga's petition against the election results. Yet the influence of the likes of former civil service head Francis Kimemia remains undiminished. Demoted for unexplained reasons during the Westgate attack and its embarrassing aftermath, Kimemia continues to be a key figure in the administration. Similarly, it escapes no one that no senior military official, including the Chief of Defence Forces, General Julius Wawera Karangi, has been punished for their handling of Westgate. Many believe that Kenyatta is beholden to the Securocrats for trying to get him off the hook at The Hague, but does not like it. Key Securocrats continue to wield significant influence, but he is only biding his time, say State House observers, until he can move against them. Meanwhile, accountants are delivering their litany of bad news about out-of-control public spending. 1 year ago, the threats were all external. It was the ICC and the challenge of Odinga on the rostrums. Out of Parliament and government, Odinga is a much reduced figure, although he presents a potential threat to Kenyatta in 2017. It is the enemy within that is Kenyatta's main concern. Interesting article. At least 2 people, I think 4 now, were killed and more than 10 others injured following a gun attack at a church in Mombasa on Sunday morning. The attack occurred when government stormed the Joy Jesus Church in Likoni and opened fire at worshippers. I'll put up a photograph of the Likoni ferry of the day I crossed it not too long ago and made me write that article about asymmetric risks in Likoni. Clearly it's getting worse and not better. Put up a photograph of a Bible next to a pool of blood inside the Joy Jesus Church in Likoni near Mombasa. Standard Group have reported full-year profit before tax up 13.3085%, revenue up 33.1966%, Profit before tax up 13.3085%. Earnings per share down 5.85%, paying a dividend of 50 cents a share. Circulation up 6%, print advertising up 41%, TV advertising up 72%. Group profitability was impacted adversely following the impairment of analog transmission equipment. They made total provisions of 151 million. I thought these were in fact strong results. Turnover and the provision signalling that Americans had been on a separate counter-terrorism operation in Kinango, Kwale, when they accidentally picked a signal of a live bomb on their counter during a routine call on Mombasa County Commissioner Nelson Mao on March 17. This is a story of this car primed for explosion with its Nokia detonator intact and in the vehicle parked for a number of days next to the police station. I'll put up a photograph of the seaside at Diani taken not too long ago. It's like still as glass. Kenya shilling has been around this 86.55 level for quite a while. The Nairobi All Share is up 6.25% this year and not far off a record high. The NSE 20 is up 1.08% this year. Safaricom closed at a record on Friday of 12.60, and I suspect it's going up to 13.50 ahead of the release of its full year earnings. Once again, thank you for stopping by.